Dalla, who was recently arrested in Canada. Now, Dalla, who is a key figure in the Khalistan Tiger Force and considered a successor to slain Khalistani leader Hardeep Singh Nijjar, was apprehended by Canadian authorities in connection with a violent shooting incident in Milton, Ontario. The Ministry of External Affairs confirmed the development in a media briefing, stating that the Indian law enforcement agencies are actively pursuing an extradition request. Now, Arsh Dalla, who has a long criminal record in India, is involved in at least 50 cases, including murder, attempt to murder, extortion and terrorist acts. He is also known for his involvement in terror financing activities. Dalla's criminal activities have made him a significant figure in the world of terrorism, especially linked to Khalistani movement. In recognition of his involvement in terrorist activities, the Indian government issued a red corner notice against him in the May of 2022, and he was designated as an individual terrorist in India in 2023. The designation came after Dalla's continued role in promoting extremist activities, including through terror financing. Now, Ministry of External Affairs spokesperson in India, Randhir Jaiswal, noted that India had already sent a request to Canada in July of 2023 for Dalla's provisional arrest, but it was declined. Despite this, Indian authorities have not relented and continue to seek cooperation from Canadian law enforcement. The Indian government has also sent a request under Mutual Legal Assistance Treaty early 2023, providing Canadian authorities with detailed information about Dalla's suspected activities, including his financial transactions, possible real estate holdings and communication records. The deteriorating diplomatic relations between India and Canada, primarily due to Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's allegation of India's involvement in the killing of Hardeep Singh Nijjar in June of 2023, have complicated matters further. Now, Trudeau claimed that there were credible allegations that India was behind the killing of Nijjar, a prominent pro-Khalistani figure in Canada. India has vehemently rejected these claims, calling them absurd and motivated, while also accusing Canada of providing a safe haven for extremist elements that promote anti-India activities. In response to the ongoing diplomatic tensions, India took a significant step earlier this month by recalling 6 diplomats from Canada after the Canadian government declared them as persons of interest in the investigation into Nijjar's killing. This move was perceived as a signal of a deepening rift between the two countries. The arrest of Arsh Dalla in Canada adds another layer to the already strained relations between the two nations. Now, India is pushing for his extradition, citing his role in a series of criminal activities that have had far-reaching impact in both India and Canada. The hope is that Dalla's extradition will help India prosecute him for his crimes, including his key role in terrorist operations linked to the Khalistan Tiger Force. Now, despite the geopolitical complexities, the Indian government remains firm in its position that individuals like Arsh Dalla must face justice in India for their involvement in violent acts and their continued efforts to incite terrorism and unrest. The Canadian authorities' response to the extradition request will be closely monitored as the diplomatic relationship between the two countries continue to evolve amid the ongoing tensions. As the investigation into Nijjar's death continues, the ongoing extradition case of Arsh Dalla could play a crucial role in shaping future interactions between India and Canada, particularly regarding their shared interest in combating terrorism and extremist activities. And shifting focus to other international stories we are tracking at this hour, Britain's newspaper, The Guardian, announced on Wednesday it would no longer post content from its official accounts on Elon Musk's X, branding it as a toxic media platform and home to often disturbing content. They wrote, and we quote, "We think that benefits of being on X are now outweighed by negatives." The newspaper, which has nearly 11 million followers on X, said in a statement. It added that its resources could be better used promoting journalism elsewhere. Now, The Guardian says its something that they have been considering for a while, given the often disturbing content promoted or found on the platform, including far-right conspiracy theories and racism. In what can be read as a fallout of Elon Musk's support to Donald Trump, the British newspaper said that the US presidential election campaign served only to underline that X is a toxic media platform and that its owner, Elon Musk, has used its influence to shape political discourse in the United States. The paper's main X handle is still accessible, but a message on its X handle advises that this account has been archived, also redirecting visitors to the website. The Guardian noted that X users would be still able to share its articles on X and that it would still occasionally embed content from X within its articles. Remember, Musk purchased X, formerly known as Twitter, for $44 billion in 2022 and has consistently courted controversies since then with his use of the platform. The recent US presidential elections is another example. Musk endorsed Donald Trump and used his own personal account, which boasts of nearly 205 million followers, to sway voters in favor of the Republicans. Trump on Tuesday announced that the Tesla and SpaceX billionaire would lead a Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE, in his incoming administration alongside entrepreneur Vivek Ramaswamy. The department will be responsible for cost cutting and restructuring of the federal government. And members of the transition team for the newly elected President Donald Trump are reportedly compiling a list of military officials who will likely lose their jobs when Trump takes charge. The list potentially includes member of the US Joint Chief of Staff. Now, this move could signal an unprecedented shakeup within the Pentagon. In his second term, Trump is expected to take a more critical stance towards military leadership, reflecting his frustrations with the past Pentagon opposition on the issues like NATO skepticism and his willingness to deploy troops during domestic protests. According to a Reuters report, plans for the dismissal are still preliminary and may evolve as Trump administration takes shape. It's also unclear if Trump will fully endorse the plan, though he has previously criticized defense leaders who opposed him, and during his campaign also mentioned intentions to remove woke generals and officials linked to the 2021 withdrawal of troops from Afghanistan. Another source indicated that the incoming administration might target military officials associated with Mark Milley, Trump's former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. The news of potential dismissal came shortly after Trump appointed Fox News commentator and veteran Pete Hegseth as his defense secretary. Now, Hegseth has recently expressed willingness to conduct a Pentagon purge. However, some current and former US officials are downplaying the likelihood of such drastic changes in personnel, arguing that it would be both unnecessary as well as destabilizing given the global tensions and the ongoing conflict in Ukraine and West Asia. And US President-elect Donald Trump has also chosen Tulsi Gabbard, a 43-year-old former Democratic representative, as well as a critic of the Biden administration, as his director for the national intelligence and the top spy of the country. Gabbard, who left the Democratic Party in 2022 to become an independent, was considered a possible candidate to become Trump's running mate and would take over now Avril Haines as the top official in the US intelligence community after the Republican president-elect starts his second term in January of next year. She's not expected to face difficulty being confirmed in the Senate, where Trump's fellow Republicans will hold at least 52 to 48 seat majority starting early next year. Gabbard has little to no direct experience with intelligence work and has not been widely expected to be tabbed for the post. She was deployed in Iraq from 2004 to 2005 as a major in the Hawaii National Guard and is now a lieutenant colonel in the US Army Reserves. Gabbard unsuccessfully sought the 2020 Democratic nomination for that year's presidential election, which was won by Joe Biden, who she then endorsed. Now, after leaving the Democratic Party, she's become increasingly critical of Biden and his administration and grew popular among conservatives, often appearing on far-right TVs and radio shows, where she became known for supporting isolationists as well as policies which showed disdain for wokeness. And President-elect Donald Trump named a firebrand Republican U.S. Representative Matt Gaetz as his nominee for Attorney General as he moves swiftly to assemble a cabinet. Matt will weaponize government, protect our borders, dismantle criminal organization and restore Americans' badly shattered faith and confidence in the Justice Department, Trump said in a statement while announcing this election, which would be a subject to confirmation by the Republican majority Senate. Trump's inner circle has described the Attorney General as the most important member of the administration after Trump himself, and a key to his plans to carry out mass deportation come 6th of January, and as well as pardon the January 6th rioters and seek retribution against those who prosecuted him over the past 4 years. Now, during his first term, Trump was infuriated by what he called an obstructive Justice Department, including Attorney General Jeff Sessions, who allowed a probe into alleged contacts between 2016 Trump campaign and Russia, as well as Bill Barr, who publicly refuted his false claims that his 2020 election loss was a result of fraud.
Well, I'm honored to be here with my colleagues from the House Freedom Caucus, where we watched Michael Cohen get dog-walked through the series of lies he has told. There is literally no branch of government that Michael Cohen has not lied to. He lied to investigators. He lied to the judge who sentenced him. He lied to the United States Congress, and he committed these lies for his own benefit. And while we're talking about what we saw in that courtroom going on for people's own benefit, we would be remiss if we did not mention this corrupt judge, this judge whose own family is making 6 figures off of Democrat politics that continues to gaslight the country that there's some sort of crime committed by President Trump. This is a made-up crime. No other American in the country would be charged with this type of crime. It's like the Mr. Potato Head doll of crimes, where they had to stick together a bunch of things that did not belong together.
And President-elect Donald Trump, ahead of his return to power in January, is announcing who he wants to fill cabinet positions with and other key roles inside his new administration, including names like Marco Rubio, Tulsi Gabbard, as well as Matt Gaetz. Among them are some of his staunchest allies on the Capitol Hill and key advisors to his 2024 election campaign. Trump will have a Republican-controlled Senate and possibly a Republican-controlled House to help usher his picks through. But he's also urging the incoming Senate leaders to embrace recess appointments, which has led to speculations that some of his choices may be more controversial.
U.S. President-elect Donald Trump has announced his picks to fill a number of crucial positions in his next administration. Some have been criticized for a lack of experience, but many share 2 common characteristics: loyalty to Trump himself and hardline political stances on issues important to the incoming president. Trump on Tuesday said he had picked Pete Hegseth to run the Department of Defense. Hegseth is a Fox News commentator and veteran of the Army National Guard, who said he quit the military in 2021, claiming it had sidelined him over his political and religious views.
I commit to provide the President and the Secretary of Defense my military advice.
He has clashed with Air Force General C.Q. Brown, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, accusing the military leader of, quote, wokeness, and suggesting he got the position because of the color of his skin. The top Democratic lawmaker on the House Armed Services Committee criticized the decision to name Hegseth to lead the Pentagon. Representative Adam Smith wrote on X, quote, "The job of Secretary of Defense should not be an entry-level position."
Because together with Donald Trump, we are going to make America not just great, but greater than it has ever been before.
Sources tell Reuters Trump is likely to tap Republican Senator Marco Rubio for the role of Secretary of State. Rubio is a veteran of the Senate's Foreign Relations and Intelligence Committees. The senator has in the past advocated for a more muscular stance with respect to U.S. geopolitical foes, including China, Iran, and Cuba. He has shifted some of his positions in recent years to fall more in line with Trump's, including pushing for a less interventionist foreign policy.
The only person in the race that I trust to do what needs to be done on these issues is President Trump.
South Dakota Governor Kristi Noem was named to lead the Department of Homeland Security, overseeing everything from border security to disaster response to the U.S. Secret Service. She has little experience on the national stage and has held no prior role with DHS. The governor rose to national prominence after refusing to impose a statewide mask mandate during the COVID-19 pandemic. Noem later garnered attention for an episode in her memoir describing how she shot and killed a pet dog she deemed insufficiently obedient.
At Harvard, does calling for the genocide of Jews violate Harvard's rules of bullying and harassment, yes or no?
Republican Representative Elise Stefanik is Trump's nominee to represent the U.S. at the United Nations. The New York lawmaker is a fierce defender of the president's agenda. She drew notice for castigating the heads of American universities for their responses to pro-Palestinian protests on campuses. Stefanik will arrive at the UN after bold promises by Trump to end the Russia-Ukraine war and Israel's war in Gaza.
As you can see, I'm not just MAGA, I'm dark MAGA.
We are hungry to be part of something bigger than ourselves.
Trump announced he would task Tesla founder Elon Musk and former Republican presidential candidate Vivek Ramaswamy with his goals of dismantling government bureaucracy, cutting excess spending, and regulations. Toward that effort, he announced plans to create another government agency, the Department of Government Efficiency, to be led by the duo.
And President-elect Donald Trump officially announced his nomination for Senator Marco Rubio to be the Secretary of State. Trump said in a statement that Marco Rubio will be a strong advocate for the nation, a true friend to the allies, and a fearless warrior who will never back down to adversaries. The choice could come as a relief to the U.S. partners worried that Trump administration could pull back from its global network of alliances, including NATO, given Trump's more America-first approach to foreign affairs.
Because together with Donald Trump,
U.S. President-elect Donald Trump officially announced on Wednesday he is nominating Senator Marco Rubio to be Secretary of State. The Republican senator from Florida is a senior member of both the Foreign Relations and Intelligence Committees. In the past, he and Trump have often clashed on foreign policy, with Rubio calling for more assertiveness on the international stage and Trump pushing for restraint. However, Rubio has softened his views in recent years to align more closely with Trump, and the billionaire has shown an inclination to make personal loyalty a central requirement for administration posts. That has left big questions about the type of diplomat Rubio will be. Rubio is arguably the most hawkish option on the shortlist for the post and is known as a hardliner on China.
Rubio.
He was sanctioned by Beijing in 2020 over his stance on Hong Kong following democracy protests. Director of the SOAS China Institute, Steve Zhang, told Reuters that Rubio's selection would put China in a potentially tough position.
Because China will have to lift its sanctions against Rubio. Otherwise, they cannot talk to the U.S. Secretary of State, which is simply not an acceptable situation for either country to be in.
Zhang believes China won't want to be accommodating of U.S. senior officials. As a result, he anticipates that Chinese President Xi Jinping will push to skip over Rubio and pursue a direct line with Trump.
I think what we are going to see as a result is that the Chinese government are likely to put Xi Jinping to engage directly with Donald Trump much more than has happened under the Biden administration. Xi believes that he could work his magic on Donald Trump as he had done in the first Trump administration.
The choice of Rubio as Secretary of State could come as some relief to U.S. partners worried that the Trump administration could pull back from its global network of alliances, including NATO. When he tapped Rubio for the job, Trump said, quote, "He will be a strong advocate for our nation, a true friend to our allies, and a fearless warrior who will never back down to our adversaries." The Ukraine crisis will be high on Rubio's agenda. He has said in recent interviews that Ukraine needs to seek a negotiated settlement with Russia rather than focus on regaining all territory that Russia has taken over the last decade. Earlier this year, he voted against a big military aid package for Ukraine, Israel, and other U.S. partners. Rubio told NBC in September, quote, I'm not on Russia's side, but unfortunately, the reality of it is that the way the war in Ukraine is going to end is with a negotiated settlement. Trump's pick of Rubio could signal stricter enforcement of oil sanctions on Iran and Venezuela. Iran's oil production has been the target of successive waves of restrictions. During Trump's first term, oil exports from the third largest producer in OPEC slowed to a trickle. While Rubio could push foreign partners to enforce existing sanctions, that could also risk retaliation by major buyers of Iranian crude, like China, which could reduce the primacy of the dollar in oil trades. Rubio has also been a fierce critic of Venezuela's socialist president Nicolas Maduro, meaning his appointment suggests an improvement in relations between the U.S. and Venezuela is unlikely. However, analysts have warned that tougher sanctions could prompt the OPEC nation to boycott Trump's goal of repatriating thousands of illegal migrants.
Time now for a short break. We'll be back after this break.
The next Indian icons, beating everyone on the globe. A new perspective awaits. B6E and XEV9E. Mahindra's electric origin SUVs. Catch them at Unlimit India.
How do you fulfill that promise? Because ultimately expectations have to be met. If you look at the political landscape, is it really changing for women? And what is the inability of the forces that dead bodies surface but not the living people? How do you fulfill that promise? Because ultimately expectations have to be met. If you look at the political landscape, is it really changing for women? And what is the inability of the forces that dead bodies surface but not the living people?
The next Indian icons, beating everyone on the globe. A new perspective awaits. B6E and XEV9E. Mahindra's electric origin SUVs. Catch them at Unlimit India.
Welcome back. A senior Lebanese official has hinted that Hezbollah could pull back from the border if there is a ceasefire, but Lebanon is pushing back against Israel's demand for freedom to take action against Hezbollah in the future. Now, Israel's been pressing its offensive against Hezbollah. Airstrikes have hit Beirut's southern suburbs for a third straight day, leveling more buildings in Hezbollah-controlled areas of the city. Ali Hassan Khalil, a close ally of Hezbollah and a top aide to Lebanon's parliament, told Al Jazeera that Lebanon is ready to follow the UN resolution of 1701, which ended the 2006 war between Israel and Hezbollah. Now, that agreement requires Hezbollah to remove its fighters and weapons from the zone between the border and the Litani River, about 30 kilometers from Lebanon's southern edge. When asked if Hezbollah is actually ready to withdraw, Khalil said that the group has committed to the resolution's terms and added that it's prepared to act precisely in line with what's outlined. Israel has been hitting Hezbollah hard since September airstrikes, ground troops, and targeting Hezbollah leaders, including Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah. Despite all of this, Hezbollah has kept up the rocket fire into Israel and is still battling Israeli forces in southern Lebanon. The US and other world powers have said that a ceasefire would have to be based on the same UN resolution requiring all weapons south of Litani to be under Lebanese state control. Now, Israel argues that the resolution was never fully implemented, pointing to Hezbollah's presence along the border, while Lebanon accuses Israel of repeatedly violating the same resolution with regular airspace incursions. And Human Rights Watch has accused Israel of committing war crimes and crimes against humanity over the forced displacement of the Palestinians in Gaza. The report describes the displacement as a systematic issue and a part of a state policy, calling it widespread. So far, there's no response from Israeli military or foreign ministry, but in the past, Israeli officials have rejected similar accusations, saying that their operations comply with international law. Under the laws of armed conflict, civilian displacement is only allowed if necessary for security or critical military reasons. But Human Rights Watch claims that Israel's actions appear aimed at creating permanent buffer zones and security corridors, which they say amounts to ethnic cleansing. Israel, however, has denied any intent to make these displacements permanent. In fact, Foreign Minister Gideon Sa'ar has stated that Palestinians in northern Gaza will be allowed to return once the conflict ends. The U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken has called for real and extended pauses in fighting in Gaza, though he emphasized that the ultimate goal should be to end the war altogether. His comments come as Israel intensifies its attack on Gaza's northern areas, raising fears among Palestinians that Israel might be aiming to clean the area for the possible return of Jewish settlers.
As funeral prayers were held on Wednesday in central Gaza for Palestinians killed in Israeli airstrikes the day before, the United States top diplomat said it's time to end the war. Speaking during a trip to Brussels, Secretary of State Antony Blinken said there needed to be real and extended pauses in fighting across Gaza for desperately needed aid to reach people there. He also said Israel has now achieved its goals of dismantling Hamas and killing those responsible for the October 7th attack.
Israel, by the standards it set itself, has accomplished the goals that it set for itself, the strategic goals it set for itself. So, this should be a time to end the war.
On Tuesday, Washington defied humanitarian groups to conclude Israel was not blocking aid as a 30-day U.S. deadline for Israel to address the situation in Gaza expired.
Hunger, starvation.
United Nations officials warned at a Security Council meeting the same day that famine remained imminent.
Aid deliveries.
At the meeting, the U.S. stressed that there must be no forcible displacement nor policy of starvation in Gaza by Israel,
which would have grave implications under U.S. and international law.
On Tuesday, Israel's military forced out most of those remaining in the northern Gaza town of Beit Hanun, estimated at a few thousand residents and already displaced families. Residents said Israeli troops ordered them to head south through a checkpoint. The military began besieging the town after sunrise prayers and struck buildings full of residents, this man said. We left without taking anything with us. No bags, no winter clothes, nothing, this woman said. Israel's campaign in northern Gaza has seen tens of thousands of Palestinians evacuated from the area. Palestinians say Israel is clearing it for use as a buffer zone and potentially for a return of Jewish settlers. The Israeli military has denied any such intention, and Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has said he does not want to reverse the 2005 withdrawal of settlers from Gaza, though hardliners in his government have talked openly about going back.
And French authorities have ramped up security in Paris ahead of the France-Israel soccer match set for Thursday. They're hoping to prevent a repeat of the violent clashes that broke out last week between the locals and Israeli fans in Amsterdam.
On the eve of a soccer match pitting France against Israel, pro-Palestinians and a Jewish group took to the streets separately. Pro-Palestinian protesters say the Nations League match should be cancelled or boycotted. This protester called it the match of shame. Outside the stadium where the game is set to take place, French authorities have ramped up security. Thousands of police are set to be deployed, according to Paris's police force. The hope is to avoid a repeat of violent clashes that unfolded in the Netherlands last week after an Israeli team played in Amsterdam. At least 5 people were hospitalized in what Israeli and Dutch politicians called anti-Semitic attacks. Pro-Palestinians have said they were responding to an attack by Israel supporters and anti-Arab chants. On Wednesday, France coach Didier Deschamps said the match north of Paris was unfolding under a heavy context. Here's Israel captain Eli Dassa.
It's not the perfect time, I would say, but it is what it is. We are expecting a good game tomorrow. We want to represent our country.
The match comes at a fraught moment. Diplomatic relations between French President Emmanuel Macron and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu have become strained by Israel's war in Gaza. Macron is expected to attend Thursday's game. Passions over Israel's conduct in the enclave run high in France. It's home to Europe's largest Jewish and Muslim communities. The head of a council of Jewish institutions in France, Jonathan Arfi, said he's worried about the game.
In an ideal world, football remains just football. However, in 2024 in Europe, 1 year after October 7th, a few days after Amsterdam, well, this event takes on an additional dimension. It's become a moment to affirm Republican values in the face of anti-Semitism.
France's Human Rights Commission said reports of anti-Semitic attacks skyrocketed by nearly 300% last year, with anti-Muslim acts up around a third. French-Palestinian lawyer Salah Hamouri says it's impossible to separate soccer from politics. The athletes who are in the team, a part of them, were also in the army or are still in the army. This is why this match must be suspended, he said. Following the violence in Amsterdam, local authorities imposed a protest ban. Dutch police say they've removed hundreds of pro-Palestinian protesters since then, with more detained on Wednesday. As for the Paris match, turnout for the game is expected to be low. Israel has urged its citizens to avoid attending cultural and sporting events abroad following last week's violence. Some 20,000 fans are expected in the stadium that can hold 4 times as many people.
An External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar on Wednesday reiterated India's long-standing stance on Israel-Hamas conflict. The Foreign Affairs Minister has said that India is advocating for an early ceasefire in Gaza and that the resolution of the Palestinian issue through a 2-state solution. While condemning terrorism and hostage-taking, we are deeply saddened by the loss of innocent civilian lives. Any response must uphold international humanitarian law, and India supports an early ceasefire, Jaishankar said during a meeting with his Saudi counterpart, Prince Faisal bin Farhan. Now, underlining Saudi Arabia's role as an important force for stability in West Asia, Jaishankar added that the situation in West Asia is a matter of deep concern, particularly the conflict in Gaza. Turning to India-Saudi relations, Jaishankar said that both the nations have fostered high-level engagements and multilateral coordination. He praised the recent advances in defense cooperation, mentioning the first-ever joint land forces exercise in 2024 and the joint naval exercises alongside the growing defense industry partnerships. And Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi met with IAEA Chief Rafael Grossi in Tehran, making it clear that Iran will not negotiate under pressure and intimidation. Now, Arakchi emphasized that Iran remains open to discussion on its nuclear program, but insists that the process must respect its national interests and rights. In a recent post, Arakchi stated and wrote, and I quote, "The ball is in the EU E3 court, urging Europe to approach talks without coercion." Meanwhile, Grossi has been working to gain more monitoring access at Iranian nuclear sites and seek answers about undeclared uranium traces. With President-elect Donald Trump likely to reinstate a maximum pressure policy, Grossi's visit could provide clues on Iran's approach in the coming months.
هر گونه قطعنامه مداخله جویانه در امور هسته‌ای جمهوری اسلامی ایران حتما با اقدامات متقابل بلادرنگ مواجه خواهد شد و آنها را بهشون اجازه نخواهیم داد که با این نوع اعمال فشار که سالهاست اون رو تجربه کردن و متوجه شدن که ما با این فشارها تاثیرپذیری از این فشارها نخواهیم داشت و برنامه خودمون رو در چارچوب منافع ملی و امنیت ملی جمهوری اسلامی ایران ادامه خواهیم داد.
Time now for a short break. We'll be back with more news and updates on the other side.
How do you fulfill that promise? Because ultimately expectations have to be met. If you look at the political landscape, is it really changing for women? And what is the inability of the forces that dead bodies surface but not the living people?
A new report estimates that more than 61,000 people have died in Khartoum state alone during the first 14 months of Sudan's war, or rather the war in Sudan. Now, researchers from London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine's Sudan Research Group report that deaths include around 26,000 from violence, far surpassing the previous UN estimates. The study warns that the starvation and diseases are becoming the leading cause of death as the conflict has left Sudan's healthcare system in ruins. Many are unable to access hospitals and graves have started appearing near homes due to blocked paths to cemeteries. The war has driven 11 million Sudanese from their home, creating what the UN calls the world's largest hunger crisis, with nearly half the population now in the need of aid. Researchers used a sampling method known as the capture-recapture to estimate unreported deaths and gathering data from social media, community surveys and obituaries to paint a fuller picture. However, both the Sudanese army and the paramilitary RSF continue to trade blame for the rising toll on civilians. The indirect impact of war, including malnutrition, disease and lack of health care, are affecting thousands, particularly children and pregnant women, as aid remains severely limited. And a man attempted to enter Brazil's Supreme Court on Wednesday and after being stopped took his own life with a bomb just outside the building exploding. Officials confirmed that the incident, which is now raising serious security concerns, especially with global leaders from the G20 set to arrive soon. Here's a report.
Explosions rocked the heart of Brazil's capital, Brasilia, on Wednesday night, just days before the G20 summit kicks off in Rio de Janeiro and a state visit to the capital by Chinese President Xi Jinping. Officials said a man killed himself with a bomb near Brasilia's Supreme Court Justice building. The court justices were evacuated safely, and President Lula da Silva had left the nearby executive palace shortly before the blasts. Local TV showed firefighters battling a blaze where the explosions occurred. An eyewitness and federal employees said she saw a man waving at her before throwing something at the building and falling to the ground. Authorities said the man owned a nearby car, in which another explosion blew open the trunk. Federal District Vice Governor Celina Leo said the capital had stepped up its security after the blasts. Authorities are still investigating if this was an isolated case. The explosions took place around the Plaza of the Three Powers. That square connects the principal buildings of Brazil's three branches of federal government. It was the scene of riots on January 8th last year, when supporters of former President Jair Bolsonaro ransacked the buildings to protest his electoral defeat.
And tensions in Peru escalated on Wednesday as multiple protests erupted in downtown Lima. Marchers took to streets to voice their anger against rising extortion and growing insecurity in the country. The demonstrations comes just before Peru hosts the APEC summit, highlighting concerns over safety and public order. And the counting of votes in Sri Lanka's snap general election began on Thursday as the country looks to decide whether President Anura Kumara Disnayake's new leftist government will gain more legislative power. This election comes after his coalition's underwhelming performance in the parliament, prompting him to dissolve the previous assembly and seek a fresh mandate. Over 17 million Sri Lankans were eligible to vote for lawmakers in the 225-member parliament. Now, early results are expected on Friday with voter turnout around 65%. Dissanayake, elected in September, aimed to tackle poverty and fight corruption, but needs a parliamentary majority to implement his key policies, including tax cuts and economic reforms. This election is critical for Sri Lanka's recovery after the 2022 economic crisis. Now, Disnayake's coalition faces challenges from rivals like the Samagi Jana Balavegaya party and the New Democratic Front. With the NIMF bailout in place, Dissanayake hopes to push forward reforms while maintaining support for the poor. And New Zealand Parliament was briefly suspended on Thursday after Maori members staged a powerful haka to disrupt a vote on controversial bill. The bill seeks to reinterpret a historic 184-year-old treaty between the British and the indigenous Maori people, sparking strong opposition. The dramatic protest highlights the deep tensions over the proposed changes to the treaty, which has long been a symbol of Maori rights and sovereignty.
The House is suspended until the... The House is suspended until the ringing of the bells. The gallery is to be cleared.
And the Thai city of Lopburi is facing an unusual problem, that of unruly monkeys. The self-proclaimed monkey city, where monkeys are believed to bring good luck, is now grappling with monkeys confronting locals, stealing food and becoming a cause of road accidents. Officials and locals have resorted to desperate measures as they try to resolve the monkey menace.
Monkeys everywhere. Climbing buildings, going through trash, and stealing fruit from the backs of trucks. This is Lopburi, a city in Thailand where macaques are intertwined with local history and believed to bring good luck. But this year, the self-proclaimed monkey city found the primates it counted on to draw in tourists became unruly, and authorities and residents were fed up. Since COVID-19, when the city shut down, troops of them have confronted locals, stolen food, and caused accidents.
I'm a local resident here, and it wasn't always like this. We were able to coexist. They were living their lives and we were living ours.
Officials and locals alike have resorted to desperate measures, and Reuters made half a dozen trips to the city this year as it tried to get the monkeys under control. As complaints mounted after February, officials wielding slingshots and traps tried to catch the monkeys, and some residents put up bars and fences to cage themselves in their homes.
There is no freedom. No one wants to live like this. We want to be able to look outside, look up to the sky, feel the free space and have light shine into our houses. But every day now we have to cage ourselves inside. We have no freedom even in the premises of our own homes.
By May, authorities stepped up the fight, resorting to a sterilization push they had begun before the pandemic. In September, Dr. Patarapol Manion, a wildlife vet with Thailand's Parks Department, told Reuters they intended to spay 100% of the population.
The key factor that allowed the monkeys to populate was due to the fact that they consumed food that contains high energy, such as human food, sweet snacks, and drinks. In consuming these food, they become extra healthy and reproduce even more.
He also told Reuters the animals would be put into a designated area and be looked after. 5 months later, the pandemonium appears to be under control, with 1,600 monkeys in captivity. Animal rights groups agree the monkeys need to be spayed, but not imprisoned. And Edwin Week of the Wildlife Friends Foundation, Thailand, says it's all only a temporary fix.
I think the next problem will be that you maybe halve the population by taking half of them away, but you're not fixing the problem at the root, which is the multiplying of the animals. So in 3-4 years, you'll have again the same amount of monkeys there, and you have to face the same kind of problem. And if you're going to use the same solution again, you just keep on going without any results. And the monkeys are suffering because currently they're in a cage that is not designed for them, it's not proper for them, and the animals are suffering in there.
The streets appear to have returned to calm for now, leaving Lopburi to reckon with how to keep its money-spinning simians from taking control again.
Shifting focus now, at COP29, United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres addressed smaller island leaders, stating that they have every right to be angry about the ongoing climate crisis.
You have every right to be angry, and I am too. You are on the sharp end of a colossal injustice, an injustice that sees the very future of your islands threatened by rising seas. Your people pounded by record hurricanes, your economies torn apart, and development gains left in tatters. This is an injustice perpetrated by the few. The G20 accounts for around 80% of global emissions, and it is an injustice that must end.
And at COP29, economists have warned that developing countries need at least $1 trillion annually by the end of the decade to tackle climate change. The focus is now on reaching a new finance target for richer countries, development lenders, and the private sector to fund the transition to greener energy and climate resilience. However, diplomatic tensions and concerns over shifts in global politics, such as the Donald Trump's victory and return to the power, are complicating negotiations. A previous finance goal of $100 billion per year, which expires in 2025, was met 2 years late in 2022. and developing nations argue that loans should be replaced by grants. The latest report suggests that without immediate action, the annual target will need to rise to $1.3 trillion by 2035. A delay in investments before 2030 could make future funding even more costly. Now, behind the scenes, negotiators are working on draft texts, but the process has been slow. Disagreements persist, especially regarding the role of major economies like China and the United States. With potential US withdrawal from future funding deals, multilateral development banks like the World Bank are expected to play a larger role, committing to increase climate financing by 60% to $120 billion annually by 2030, with significant contributions from private sector. On Thursday, Azerbaijan's banks pledged nearly $1.2 billion to fund projects aimed at transitioning to a low-carbon economy, demonstrating the financial sector's growing role in addressing climate changes. And a significant brush fire broke out in Manhattan's Inwood Hill Park on Wednesday, sending thick smoke into the sky. Aerial footage captures the intensity of the blaze, which was clearly visible from Bronx as seen from a vehicle crossing the Henry Hudson Bridge. The cause of the fire remains undetermined. This comes as the Jennings Creek fire continues to burn along the New Jersey-New York border. The fire, which has scorched 5,000 acres of woodland near Greenwood Lake, has already claimed the life of a park employee. And as of Wednesday, it's 30% contained, though the cause is still unclear. And super typhoon Usagi hit the Philippines on Thursday, bringing strong winds and heavy rain. Authorities have ordered evacuation in northeastern towns as the storm intensifies. This marks the fifth typhoon to strike the country in just 1 month.
Kita may kasamang malakas na ulan. Mayero to, no?
And that's all from me tonight. Thank you very much for watching.
Thanks for tuning in to News 9. As the air quality in the national capital deteriorated to severe levels this week, the Commission for Air Quality Management, the CAQM, has announced the activation of Stage 3 of the Graded Response Action Plan, that's the GRAP 3, in the national capital and its surrounding areas starting from tomorrow. Now, the Centre's Air Quality Commission has announced the implementation of Stage 3 of GRAP effective from 8 a.m. on Friday, that's November 15th, and with Stage 3 of the GRAP in place, all interstate buses from the National Capital Region states, except electric vehicles, CNG vehicles and BS6 diesel buses, will be prohibited from entering the National Capital, alongside, of course, a stringent ban on construction and demolition activities across all of NCR, suspension of mining-related activities across all of NCR, and consideration of shifting to online classes for students up to class 5th And of course, the daily water sprinkling on major roads, that's going to be increased. There would also be restrictions on the plying of BS3 petrol and BS4 diesel vehicles in the national capital and the districts of Gurugram, Faridabad, Ghaziabad and Gautam Budh Nagar. Delhi's air quality continued to deteriorate, with the air quality index reaching the severe category on Thursday morning. At 9 a.m., the AQI was measured to be at 428, indicating a significant worsening of air pollution. The Delhi air crisis, it continues, and this comes after Delhi reported the country's worst AQI on Wednesday, also crossing into the severe range for the first time this season. Earlier, Environment Minister Gopal Rai had said that GRAP Stage 3 would not yet be imposed, as the situation is expected to improve from tomorrow. That doesn't seem to be the case. He also mentioned that the government would review all current action plans and campaigns and enhance the enforcement of efforts to prevent pollution levels from reaching the emergency threshold, which is why GRAP 3 has been implemented 8 a.m. from the 15th of November.